Hello, welcome to Book Journey. Today, I'm going to tell you about the book The Middle Ground by the renowned American historian Richard White, subtitled Indians, Empires, and Republics in the Great Lakes Region. When you hear the title, you might think this is a book about the history of Native Americans. Native Americans are the indigenous people of the Americas, belonging to the Asian race. About 15,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Native Americans traveled from the easternmost part of today's Eurasian continent, the Chukchi Peninsula in Siberia, across the Bering Strait to the Americas, which were then called the New World. When the explorer Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas in the 15th century, he mistakenly believed he had reached India, and thus referred to the Native Americans as Western Indians, a term that, though incorrect, has been used ever since. When it comes to the fate of Native Americans, some people might have a simplistic impression that before the arrival of European colonizers, the lives of Native Americans in North America were idyllic and peaceful, with communal hunting and mutual assistance. Once European colonizers arrived, Native Americans were immediately enslaved, with no ability to resist. However, the author of this book, Richard White, through extensive research of historical materials, believes that there are other truths beyond this. The author of this book, Richard White, is a professor at Stanford University and has served as the president of the American Historical Association. He is a leading expert in the American historical community on the history of indigenous peoples and the history of the Western frontier. The English version of this book was published in the 1990s. Author White spent over 500,000 words to tell the story of the coexistence, exchange, and struggle between the Native Americans of the Great Lakes region in North America, the British and French colonizers, and the emerging United States. The book, known for its rigorous narration and authority, won the 1992 American Book Award for Distinguished Historical Writing and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize that year. The Chinese version of this book was published by CITIC Press in 2021. The Middle Ground and Great Lakes region mentioned in the book's title actually refer to the Great Lakes region on the North American plains. It spans the border between today's United States and Canada and is the world's largest group of freshwater lakes, including Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. To the north of the five Great Lakes is today's Ontario province in Canada, while to the south are the U.S. states of Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. From the mid-17th century to the early 19th century, two major tribal alliances of the local Native Americans in this region, the Iroquois and the Algonquins, formed a complex relationship with the two major European colonial powers, the British and the French, which was both interdependent and conflict-ridden. Between the two alliances, trade, mutual assistance, vigilance, and warfare coexisted. Over this long period of 1.5 centuries, the social structure, economic form, culture, and military technology of the Native Americans themselves also underwent profound changes and development due to this complex contact and exchange. In the preface, White poetically states that the history between European colonizers and Native Americans in North America is often oversimplified. In the eyes of many historians, the former is like surging waves, while the latter is like hard, stubborn rocks. Under the continuous impact of the waves, the rocks are broken down and eventually turn into sand and debris on the beach. However, if we delve into the depths of history, as we would into the depths of the sea, we will find that this is not a simple story of assimilation and being assimilated. Next, I will divide the content of this book into 3 parts for you. First, let's go back to the Great Lakes region in the mid-17th century to see the daily life of Native Americans in North America at that time and how they managed to get along with the British and French colonial powers through political alliances and trade. In the second part, I will combine the narration of the author White and other related research works to tell you how this coexistence was shattered with the outbreak of the 7 Years' War between Britain and France. Finally, in the third part, we will look back at why the victory of the American Revolutionary War led to the gradual deterioration of the living conditions of Native Americans in the Great Lakes region. At the beginning of the book, the author White takes readers back 300 years to the Great Lakes region of North America with his poetic writing. Here, there are vast, rippling lakes, as well as fertile plains dotted with rolling hills and lush forests. Starting from the early 17th century, the two major European colonial powers, Britain and France, both launched colonial expansion movements in North America. Unlike South America, what initially attracted European colonizers to North America was the abundant fishery resources of the North Atlantic, especially cod. Salted cod was a common item on European tables and a significant commodity in trade. As the catch increased, long-distance fishermen decided to establish temporary processing stations in the Newfoundland area of North America, which formed the initial impetus for the two countries' colonization of North America. Subsequently, Europeans discovered that North America was rich in fur, timber, and other resources, and was suitable for growing tobacco, cotton, and other economic crops urgently needed in Europe. At the same time, both Britain and France hoped to open a new northwest passage from the North Atlantic to the rich Southeast Asia and even India to obtain spices, rubber, dyes, and precious metals from there. This also promoted the exploration of North American geography and the establishment of colonial outposts by Britain and France. France first occupied the fertile and temperate St. Lawrence River Valley and named it New France. It stretches from the Gulf of St. Lawrence on the Atlantic coast to Lake Ontario, with the St. Lawrence River running through Quebec and Ontario provinces in Canada, serving as the passage for the Great Lakes water system to flow into the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, British colonial settlers also established a series of colonial settlements along the east coast of North America, from Virginia to Massachusetts, Maryland, and so on, which later became the original 13 states of the United States. As the colonial settlements of Britain and France continued to expand southward and westward, they eventually met in the Great Lakes region. At that time, in the Great Lakes region, there were countless Native American habitats scattered like stars in the sky. They lived by both hunting and farming, growing corn, pumpkins, and beans, catching sturgeon and beavers in streams, and hunting bison and elk in the prairies and forests. Due to the lack of advanced metal smelting technology, stone tools and weapons made of granite and diorite were still the main tools and weapons for Native Americans. Additionally, the social organization of Native Americans at that time was still in a very primitive state. The so-called tribes and clans were merely nominal. In reality, they were very loosely organized and lacked a strong sense of cultural and kinship identification. The truly cohesive communities were actually individual Native American villages, each with dozens to hundreds of people. The villagers were connected to other villages through marriage ties, forming what was called a tribe. Therefore, the author White said that theoretically, every Native American belonged to both their paternal and maternal villages and clans. However, this was not the case in practice. The loyalty of Native Americans would constantly change depending on their place of residence, marital relationships, and practical interests. There were often many contradictions within tribes and clans. The tribal chiefs, in fact, had very limited power and often needed the support of other elders and warriors in the tribe to make major decisions. However, this primitive and loose social life did not equate to peace and tranquility. In the mid-17th century, when the French colonial expedition arrived at Lake Huron in the Great Lakes region from Canada, they were shocked to find that the area had just experienced a brutal large-scale conquest war. The Iroquois tribes, from the west of the Great Lakes region, had launched indiscriminate attacks on the Algonquin tribes living here. The purpose of the Iroquois War was to seize more land, spoils of war, and hunting resources, especially beavers. The fur of this amphibious rodent was a hard currency in trade at that time. Thus, this war was also known as the Beaver War. As the defeated party, many young and able-bodied members of the local Algonquin tribes became slaves of the Iroquois, while the elderly, weak, sick, and disabled were slaughtered after surrendering. Out of fear of their long-standing enemy, the Iroquois, the Algonquins showed great curiosity and friendliness towards the earliest French colonizers who arrived in the Great Lakes region. A French priest named Alouez said that they gave the Native Americans who received them firearms, as well as iron tools such as axes and knives, as gifts. After witnessing the powerful capabilities of these novel tools, the Native Americans even regarded Alouez as a mighty sorcerer from afar. They knelt before him, praying for him to cast spells to drive away famine, plague, and their enemies, and to bless the land with bountiful harvests year after year. Although at the initial contact, due to unfamiliarity and vigilance, there were some violent incidents of mutual attacks between the two sides, soon the relationship between Native Americans and European colonizers stabilized due to frequent trade. In the trade, Native Americans provided food to European colonial settlers, including corn, berries, fish, as well as the furs of beavers, bears, and other animals, in exchange for spirits, weapons, metal tools, textiles, and items such as mirrors, lamps, and glassware. Since glass mirrors could reflect images more clearly and stably than lake water, they were regarded as magical items by Native Americans. Native American tribes that were too far away from European colonial settlements would go to great lengths and pay high prices to ask neighboring tribes to purchase on behalf of them, even used axes or metal pots that had already been worn out. According to the customs of North American Native Americans, such rare and precious items were no longer seen as simple tools or property, but would circulate as special gifts among tribes, helping the givers to gain high status. Similarly, in trade with Native Americans, European colonizers also accepted a unique commodity, wampum, a decorative belt made by weaving shell and snail shell flakes with yarn or animal leather, which could be worn on the arm, waist, or draped over the shoulder, but its most important function was as a circulating currency and gift. In the Native American mindset at that time, they did not have the European concept of private ownership and the notion of commodity value. Instead, they viewed trade more as a reciprocal gift-giving that symbolized close relationships. Therefore, they expected a fixed amount of goods in return for their furs and other specialties from European colonizers, and only more, not less, could be accepted. They could not tolerate fluctuations in fur prices, especially declines when supply exceeded demand. Some tribal chiefs had even threatened the French governor, saying that if their beaver furs could not be exchanged for the same amount of firearms, iron tools, and spirits as before, it would mean that the French colonial authorities no longer respected them and had broken the close relationship of the past. In that case, they would turn to trade with the British. Chronologically, the British who came from the coastal colonies of North America to the Great Lakes region arrived almost at the same time as the French merchants. Native Americans soon discovered that the British were more willing to pay higher prices for their specialties and offered better returns, such as high-quality woolen cloth from Britain and fine rum made from sugarcane from the Caribbean islands. Consequently, Native American canoes laden with various goods flocked to the commercial cities of the British colonies, such as Albany in New York State. According to the author's statistics, between 1716 and 1720, only 30 Native American canoes loaded with goods came for trade. However, in the following 5 years, the number surged to 323, a more than tenfold increase. The French colonial government acknowledged that the profits France obtained from trade with Native Americans in the Great Lakes region were far from covering the expenses of the French king in maintaining the colonies. However, in order to maintain a balance of power with the British colonial forces and to secure military and political alliances with local Native Americans to prevent the British from moving northward, this unprofitable business had to continue. Moreover, to ensure the safety of trading fairs and colonial settlements, the colonial governors often had to present valuable gifts to the chiefs of various Native American tribes. According to statistics from the French colonial government, by the mid-18th century, the annual expenditure on gifts for tribal chiefs alone had reached 65,000 livres. The reason why British colonial forces gradually overshadowed the French in North America was due to a series of advantages. First and foremost was the British Navy, which was unparalleled in combat strength in Europe. It could effectively weaken and even sever trade and connections between France and its North American colonies, preventing France from sending reinforcements from the homeland or other colonies. Secondly, the developed finance and industrial manufacturing of Britain could provide more investment and trade goods for the colonies. Third, and most importantly, the British colonial form in North America was more diverse and flexible. Compared to the single royal direct administration of French colonies, the early British colonies had three organizational forms: chartered colonies, proprietary colonies, and royal colonies. Chartered colonies were established by private commercial colonial companies with royal charters. Proprietary colonies were founded by individual investors from Britain, while royal colonies were directly under the British Crown and governed by royal-appointed governors. This diverse form of colonial management and operation gave British colonizers more autonomy in management, encouraging their investment and immigration enthusiasm. As a result, by the mid-18th century, the population of British North American colonies had exceeded 2 million, 30 times that of French colonies. Additionally, since the British colonies were geographically spread out from south to north over a vast area, their commercial and economic forms varied greatly. From handicrafts, animal husbandry to grain and cash crop cultivation, they ensured a rich supply of products for trade exchange and secured profits through diversified operations, which was something the French colonies, relying solely on fur trade, could hardly compare with. Soon, the growing number of British immigrants, constantly seeking investment and trade opportunities, began to expand westward aggressively, attempting to acquire more land and trade directly with Native American tribes in more remote areas to obtain cheaper furs and other goods. Thus, direct armed conflicts with the French colonies became inevitable. Initially, the war consisted of sporadic, small-scale skirmishes. For example, in June 1752, 30 French officers led more than 200 warriors from friendly Native American tribes departing from Detroit to attack Pickawillany, a small town in Ohio, that also served as a newly established British trading center and settlement. The inhabitants included not only British merchants but also Native Americans from the Miami tribe. To punish the British for their encroachment, the French executed a British merchant and the Native American tribal chief in the settlement and sold these Miami Native Americans into slavery to other tribes. Originally, the British royal family and government in London paid little attention to such trivial conflicts. However, a dramatic shift in the European continent directly changed the British government's mindset and also significantly impacted the relationship between the two great powers, Britain and France, as well as the fate of Native Americans in the Americas. This upheaval was the result of strategic adjustments and realignments among the European powers due to shifts in their relative strengths, historically known as the Diplomatic Revolution. The immediate catalyst was a large-scale war called the War of the Austrian Succession. On one side were Britain and its new allies, Austria and the Netherlands, while on the other side were France, Spain, and Prussia. After the war, France altered its previous diplomatic strategy, declaring a truce with its former archenemy, the Habsburg-ruled Austria, and instead targeting Britain as its primary adversary. In turn, Britain, having lost its traditionally powerful ally Austria, had to rely on the emerging Prussia to counterbalance France. Under these circumstances, Britain felt that if it did not curb France, the carefully maintained European political equilibrium would be shattered. Therefore, it had to resolutely respond to all diplomatic and military challenges posed by France, whether in Europe or around the world. Thus, starting in 1754, Britain and France chose to clash in the Americas, a conflict known as the 7 Years' War, which actually lasted about 9 years and raged simultaneously in mainland Europe, India, in Asia, and North America. Initially, within what is now Ohio, the British and French forces began intermittent skirmishes, with local Native American tribes choosing sides and joining the war. At first, the French had the upper hand because they had deployed more regular troops in North America. In contrast, the British colonies, fragmented and lacking unity, could only rely on locally recruited militia for combat, resulting in successive defeats. However, as the war dragged on, Britain's advantages gradually emerged. It could leverage its substantial financial resources and naval and shipping superiority to continuously send reinforcements and supplies from the homeland to America. By 1758, Britain had managed to assemble an army of 50,000 troops in North America, including regular soldiers from the homeland, colonial militia, and Native American warriors supporting the British, preparing to drive the French out of Ohio, and then move north to occupy Canada. In contrast, the French forces numbered only about 1/7 of the British forces. Additionally, the French faced another unfavorable situation. The North American coast had been blockaded by the British Navy, cutting off the supply of weapons, ammunition, and other logistical materials for the French forces. In July 1758, the British forces captured the largest military stronghold and fortress of the French North American colonies, Louisbourg, located in present-day Nova Scotia, Canada. The following year, with the assistance of 1,000 Iroquois Native American warriors, a colonial army from North America also captured Fort Niagara in New York State, signifying that the French had essentially lost control of the Great Lakes region. When the 7 Years' War ended in 1763, France not only lost Canada, but was also forced to cede all its territories east of the Mississippi River to Britain. The painstakingly developed North American colonies of France could be said to have collapsed. The author analyzes that the Native American tribes, who actively participated in the 7 Years' War, had diverse purposes and demands. For the relatively powerful Iroquois tribal alliance, which had good relations with the British colonies, they hoped to use the war to drive out both the French and the hostile Algonquin forces from the Great Lakes region, expand their own territory, and stand in a tripartite balance of power with the British and French colonial forces. As for the other Native American tribes that fought on the side of the French, such as the Algonquins, they had various motivations. Some were due to traditional alliances, some sought more rewards and trading opportunities from the French, and others simply joined the French forces because their opposing tribes supported the British, hoping to take the opportunity for revenge. When the French forces gradually gained the upper hand, these tribes switched sides one after another. In the 1990s, Hollywood produced a major film called The Last of the Mohicans, which tells the story of Native American warriors during the 7 Years' War. The film's protagonist, Hawkeye, is an Iroquois warrior serving the British, belonging to the Mohawk tribe. In contrast, the film's antagonist, the brutal Huron tribal chief Magua, is an Algonquin who fought alongside the French forces. Although the film's storyline is fictional, it vividly portrays the atmosphere of unresolved old grievances and new animosities among Native American tribes at that time. However, as soon as the war ended, the brief honeymoon between the British colonial authorities and the Native American tribes came to an end. First, the Native Americans believed that they had made great contributions and should be generously rewarded by the British colonial administration, with rewards that must exceed those of the French in both amount and value. However, this did not happen. After all, the 7 Years' War was primarily fought on the European continent. To support its ally Prussia in defeating Austria and to guard against a French invasion of the homeland, Britain had already spent a large amount of military funds and could not allocate additional funds to maintain the loyalty of the Native American tribes as the French colonial governors had done in the past. Moreover, with the departure of the French colonial forces, immigrants and merchants from British colonies such as Virginia and Pennsylvania began to move westward and southward in large numbers, establishing trading posts and settlements in the Great Lakes region. Their numbers far exceeded those of the French in the past, causing real panic among the local Native Americans. These white people, who had already gained a lot of wealth through trade, were about to take over and drive them off the land. More importantly, before this, the Native Americans in the Great Lakes region could still take advantage of the contradictions between the British and French colonial forces to strengthen themselves. However, the end of the 7 Years' War meant the departure of the French. From then on, the political stage of the Great Lakes region was left with only two forces, the Native Americans and the British colonies, which meant that both sides lost the room for maneuver and had to confront each other directly. As early as 1760, before the war ended, armed conflicts had already begun between the two sides. The author says that these violent incidents seemed like a rehearsal for the future American Indian Wars. In Tennessee, a group of Cherokee warriors who had fought alongside the British forces were mistaken for other Native Americans supporting the French on their way home and were attacked by local British immigrants. In retaliation, the Cherokee warriors began to raid the immigrant settlements they encountered along the way, and soon the conflict escalated into a war between the British regular army and the entire Cherokee tribe, with heavy casualties on both sides. Eventually, in August of that year, the British colonial government and the Cherokee tribe reached a fragile agreement. Both sides would restore peace, punish those who had wantonly killed prisoners, but at the same time, the Cherokees' habitat in Tennessee was severely reduced as a punishment. Similarly, in the eyes of British colonizers and North American colonists, Native Americans gradually became a threat. During the 7 Years' War, many Native Americans fought alongside them. In addition to their traditional bows, arrows, and tomahawks, they also learned to use firearms and ride horses. Familiarity with the geographical environment, combined with excellent hunting skills, enabled Native Americans to skillfully carry out reconnaissance and ambush missions during the war. In the eyes of many European officers who participated in the war, if they ever became enemies, Native Americans could very well become their most dangerous foes. On the other hand, having acquired these military knowledge and skills from Europe, Native Americans no longer considered European colonizers invincible. Moreover, due to their participation in the war, military leaders within the tribes gradually gained more power, overshadowing the original chiefs. Many military leaders called for a tough policy towards the expanding European colonizers, while the chiefs' opposition and admonitions often proved ineffective. The reason was simple: unlike the French, the British did not regularly distribute generous gifts to tribal chiefs, which led the tribe members to believe that their chiefs had lost authority and were no longer respectable. Another consequence of the chiefs' declining authority was that the warriors in the tribes were less restrained, leading to an increasing number of attacks on other tribes and white immigrants. In addition to the growing number of immigrants and the proliferation of new settlements, Native Americans had two more reasons to detest European colonizers. First, the large influx of spirits through trade, especially British brewed whiskey and Caribbean rum. Many elder tribal chiefs were deeply distressed by the drunken behavior of the younger generation, considering spirits a conspiracy or weapon by the whites to destroy Native Americans. Second, the resumption of trade and the influx of white immigrants led to the destruction of the natural ecology in the Great Lakes region. The animal populations that Native Americans relied on for survival, whether beavers, bison, or elk, were rapidly declining. As a result, many Native American tribes had to give up their former nomadic hunting lifestyle and settle in one place for a long time, cultivating crops like corn and raising livestock. Consequently, their sense of land ownership became more acute, making it easier for conflicts to arise when white immigrants encroached on Native American settlements. All these factors led to the result that, although the war had ended, the Great Lakes region had become a lawless land filled with violence and danger. In the blink of an eye, the Great Lakes region endured nearly a decade of chaos and violence, and by 1775, the Native American tribes there were once again drawn into a new war, the American Revolutionary War. Once more, Native Americans had to choose sides between two opposing white forces, this time between Britain and the newly emerging United States. For the Native Americans in the Great Lakes region, those supporting Britain had a slight numerical advantage. The British colonial administration's relatively lenient management policies, which respected the traditions and homelands of Native American tribes, were a significant factor. Moreover, the British military, as a professional standing army, had stricter discipline. On the other hand, the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, though collectively named as such, was essentially a hastily assembled militia from various colonies. They fought independently with relatively loose military discipline and conduct. Sometimes, under the guise of punishing British collaborators, they would raid and even massacre Native American tribes in the Great Lakes region. In March 1782, in Gnadenhutten, Ohio, the most severe massacre of Native Americans during the Revolutionary War occurred. A group of Delaware Native Americans, driven by the need to solve their hunger problems, had no choice but to return to their village. However, they were immediately surrounded by a group of Pennsylvania militiamen. These militiamen accused them of being British spies and thieves, and killed 96 of them early the next morning. This event directly led many Delaware Native American tribes to join the British forces in the war. Despite this, the ultimate outcome of the American Revolutionary War remained unchanged. Although Native Americans were brave and selfless in their fight, they lacked unified command and training, often fighting independently without mutual support. In contrast, the Continental Army, with the support of the French Army and Navy, achieved successive victories. Eventually, with Britain's recognition of American independence, many Native American tribes chose to follow their British allies, either moving north into Canada or continuing to migrate westward in search of safety and survival. As for the Native American tribes that chose to remain in the Great Lakes region, they soon discovered that the United States was vastly different from the British and French colonizers of the past. This new nation was a unified entity with a single will, and its primary interest was not only trade but also westward expansion, incorporating more and more land into its domain. Under these circumstances, the only option for the politically disorganized and loosely managed Native American tribes was to unite and negotiate with the U.S. government to strive for a peace agreement that would be as lenient as possible for themselves. In 1795, the U.S. government and the chiefs of the Algonquin tribes, including the Delaware, Shawnee, Ottawa, Miami, and others, collectively signed the Treaty of Greenville. The U.S. government formally acquired most of the land in Ohio at an extremely low cost. Author Richard White said that the chiefs were willing to sign this harsh agreement for several reasons. First, Native American tribal warriors, fighting independently and lacking modern weapons, found it difficult to win a protracted war. Second, due to the loose organization and limited authority of the tribes, all the chiefs feared that if they refused to sign, they would be immediately replaced by other leaders within their tribes. Conversely, by signing, their chief status was recognized by the U.S. government, and they would also receive an annual annuity and gifts from the U.S. government. What could be better? Facing this situation, many U.S. federal government officials admitted that the plight of the Native Americans in the Great Lakes region was far worse than during the era of active British and French colonial forces. A regional administrator named Harrison wrote in his diary, "In the Native Americans' memory, the period of French presence was a joyful golden age. Many elderly Native Americans said to me, "We respect you as we respected our French fathers, but why can't you treat us the same way?" The French never interfered arbitrarily, nor did they take away our land. But now, even a poor Native American who wants to peel a bit of bark to make a roof to keep out the rain might have a rude white man jump out with a gun, claiming it as his property. Finally, some Native American tribal leaders made up their minds to launch a comprehensive war against the U.S. government and white immigrants in the form of a tribal alliance, with their leader being Tecumseh, a Shawnee tribal leader from Ohio. In later legends, this Algonquin chief was both a brave warrior and a visionary leader. As early as the Revolutionary War period, he led his tribe to fight alongside the British forces. Even in the eyes of European colonizers, Tecumseh was a Native American chief worthy of respect. When other Algonquin chiefs signed the Treaty of Greenville with the U.S. government, Tecumseh refused to participate. He opposed the cession of any land, claiming that the land was a common property of all Native Americans, just like air and water. Thus, when the so-called War of 1812 broke out between Britain and the United States in 1812, Tecumseh resolutely decided to join forces with the British to try to restore the old territories of Native American tribes in the Great Lakes region and Ohio. Unfortunately, Tecumseh died in battle at the Battle of the Thames in May 1813. Tecumseh's death left the Native American Resistance Alliance in the Great Lakes region leaderless. Author Richard White said that Tecumseh's death marked the ultimate demise of the middle ground in the Great Lakes region. Since then, the descendants of Native Americans in the Great Lakes region could only revisit the good old days through legends passed down by their predecessors and in their dreams. Conclusion. Well, that's basically the end of the main content of the middle ground. Author Richard White spent over 500,000 words to present a grand historical tapestry on the vast stage of the Great Lakes region in North America, how Native American tribes and the two major European colonial empires, Britain and France, jointly constructed an open middle ground. In this book, through the presentation and analysis of a large number of historical materials, White shows another side of Native American history in the process of European colonization of North America. In this book, we can see that over a period of 150 years, from law, trade, culture, economy, to lifestyle, Native Americans and European immigrants in the middle ground shaped a world completely different from traditional America and Europe. Regrettably, this open and integrated world ultimately came to an end with the rise and fall of various forces. The first reason was that the British and French colonial powers were forced to gradually withdraw from North America after the 7 Years' War and the Revolutionary War, thereby breaking the original situation of multiple parties on the political stage of the Great Lakes region, which were both cooperative and balanced. The second reason was the lag in the development of the social organization and economic forms of Native Americans in North America. They never managed to form a unified and powerful alliance to deal with the threats and challenges of European colonial forces and the independent United States. However, the demise of the middle ground in the Great Lakes region did not mean the end of Native American resistance. Starting from the 1860s, facing the advancing American westward immigrants, the Native American tribes in the Midwest engaged in a 30-year-long, tragic, and heroic Indian Wars. Although this struggle ultimately ended in failure and the surviving tribes had to move into reservations, it left a profound mark in history and became a deep scar in the process of American founding and national integration.